Hello, everyone. I thought about recording a quick episode. Right now, in Etobicoke, Canada, it's 4 degrees Celsius. Please as a disclaimer, this episode may include coughing noises, the sounds of wind, and hopefully it's audible till the end. But I don't know, there was something, an idea arose, a question, an observation of sort. And I thought about, okay, let's create a memory of this moment. So, to be honest, an idea arose. And in the title, for now, I've written, "Is it God's life?" And in the subtitle, I've written, "What is living in the moment?" ? And is man's life indirectly God's life? And that's what I'm going to attempt to talk about. First thing, for anybody who is religious listening to this, my intent is not to be disrespectful, but to inquire. I'm approaching this moment more with a philosophical approach to, in some sense, see how does man's mind engage the concept of God, and really what else could in some sense be a hidden angle to the moment. I had a moment where I changed the song. I had a moment where I was wondering what is living in the moment and what is here now. And this is coming from a person who has wondered about a monotheistic approach to the concept of God, and who has wondered about other systems of thought and how the concept of God is approached. There's this incredible thing I read about the idea of God. Somebody was making a distinction between polytheism and monotheism. Somebody had said that when it comes to polytheism, everything is God's. But when it comes to monotheism, everything is God's, and there's a comma between the D and the S. That means from the monotheistic approach, man is secondary. I mean, I shouldn't say secondary. I should say it in this sense that oh, I forgot to mention in the disclaimer, there may be pauses in between, so anyways, anybody who listens to this, I appreciate it. So, what I'm trying to say is that in the monotheistic view, the idea of God is considered as inconceivable. In the polytheistic view, God is seen as conceivable. But ultimately, what many don't know about, let's say, Vedic tradition. Whether it's polytheism, whether it's monotheism, eventually man is noticing an inconceivable moment. In the Upanishads, we find this quote that says, "The seer of the seen is unseen." That which is looking through one's eyes is not observable. The observer, in some sense, we cannot look at that which is looking. Some sense. And I'm not talking about like somebody looking at themselves in the mirror. I'm just saying that there seems to be when it comes to human psychology, there's a division between the observer and the observed. The observed is form-based. The observer seems to be formless, attributeless, whatever you want to call it. It's a mystery that what is it actually that is looking through our eyes, and there's a spectrum of considerations. What I have realized, there's no such thing as an absolute knowledge simply because the world is not a photograph, it is a film. The world is changing, it is moving, and movement is the key to life. We right now, on some level, are the periodic table that has reorganized itself in a sophisticated way, and we are conscious that we are moving. When I look at lesser species in nature, it seems to me that they are conscious, but they're not conscious of their movement beyond their environment. It's like the human being's intelligence gives it an additional amount of stress that other species don't seem to have. Mankind gets frightened about its mortality, but other species don't even consider it. Like, they don't care. They care about, like, let's say if there's a gazelle in an environment and a lion comes, or a tiger, the gazelle of course cares in that moment. But when the gazelle is alone, it doesn't contemplate, it doesn't wonder about the edge of the cosmos. That seems to be the privilege of a more complicated brain. Since childhood, I was raised in a society. I was born in Iran, and Iran is a theocratical society. And because it's a theocratical society, it's another way of saying church and state, or mosque and state, have not separated. So anybody who wants to function in a society that is based on religious law eventually gets acquainted to religion. At the same time, there are mysteries to the human experience and human consciousness that when man doesn't find an answer, he still seeks something to hold on to. There's many ways we can look at something, and I feel that is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom is not per se an absolutist acceptance. Wisdom is in some sense the realization that the moment, just like a human being can move in multiple ways, so can the moment. And what is meaning, how the human being moves to itself. But this episode is me attempting to, pretty much my focus is on a sort of religious, I want to comment on the archetype of God, pretty much. There's a quote I want to read for the viewers. If I can find this, it would be epic. This quote is from a man named Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi is, some people called him the incarnation of silence, but this dude, this sage, this enlightened being, was in some sense, he was this Indian yogi who lived on the mountain of Arunachala. And he was someone who was liberated at a very young age, and this was obvious when you get to see his life and the flow of his life and what he attracted. What I have found fascinating is that when it comes to certain human experience, there are people on the planet who they have a sort of insight, a sort of understanding where it has a global attraction, where people, it's as if the person is not like right now. You could say that I'm someone who has the intent of communicating to a global audience, right? But these sages who actually had a lot of people from the planet acknowledge them, they did not per se have an intent to communicate to the planet, but they were being a part of the presence of the world, and in a manner of speech, energetically, people realize there is them. Anyways, this quote I want to read from Ramana Maharshi is key, because after reading this was a few days ago, I remember reading this quote, and after I read this quote, I had a sort of, I don't want to say existential crisis, but it was more like a sort of refascination for how my attention is held, or how the moment is held. Anyways, Sri Ramana Maharshi says this quote is important. He says the heart is used in the Vedas and the scriptures to denote the place whence the notion I in quotations springs. Does it spring only from the fleshy ball? It springs within us somewhere, right in the middle of our being. The I in quotations has no location. Everything is the self with a capital S. There is nothing but that. So the heart must be said to be the entire body of ourselves and of the entire universe, conceived as I in quotations. But to help the practitioner, we have to indicate a definite part of the universe or of the body, so this heart is pointed out as the seat of the self. But in truth, we are everywhere, we are all that is, and there is nothing else. Now, this comment is coming from a perspective of, let's say, a yogic perspective, but the title of this episode is let's say a monotheistic, my commentary on more a monotheistic perspective. So it's kind of like Sri Ramana Maharshi is saying that there is a sense of self that we all have, right? In modern times we call it ego. Alan Watts explained the ego as just the conscious attention to self in the moment. But really what it is that the body is an object, but the mind doesn't seem to be an object. There's even stories of Bodhidharma, this patriarch of Buddhism. Somebody came to him and said, Bodhidharma, my mind is restless, I can't sleep, what do I do? And Bodhidharma was pretty much like, bring your mind in front of me and I'll pacify your mind. And the guy couldn't find his mind, and Bodhidharma looks at him, this enlightened sage, and he says, there, your mind is pacified, as if he's saying that the mind is not an object, so that we can actually experience the suffering of an object, right? And so it's like the suggestion that human intelligence is starting from somewhere, and it appears that it's starting from a presence, right, a position. But this position technically doesn't have location for the I thought. That it's another way of saying our body is inside a location, but our mind, which is a sort of non-objective awareness to the moment, is there is no location in it. It's kind of like if you were to see a candle, right? The candle, the body of the candle is, you could say, physical. It's like you can, in some sense, it's tangible, but when it comes to the glow of the candle or the light of the candle, it's like the person can't touch the light, so similarly, it's like the body is physical, but the mind doesn't seem to be physical. Now, we are physical creatures that are administering ourselves, and we're administering ourselves through the free will. And what the free will implies, for now, we have this idea where it's like the idea of me, the idea of self is moving the moment. But what Sri Ramana Maharshi is saying is, when you realize that the mind is not an object, how can your sense of self have a location? How can your subjective sense of self have a location if your mind is not an object? The idea developed further for me. In the sense that it's as if I am not an object, or if what is moving the objective body, if the mind is not an object, and if the mind doesn't have location, it's kind of becoming synonymous to the notion of the monotheistic God, which is inconceivable. In monotheistic religion, there's this, I see it as a sort of clue. Something to say is that please keep in mind that this is on a tangent, but the best time to quit smoking is before you smoke your first cigarette. So that's important for viewers to remember. Anyways, to continue. Pretty much I'm drawing parallels between what I am perceiving. It's like from the Vedic point, the sense of self is this mysterious attention that is not form-oriented. Kind of like the awareness to shape doesn't have a shape. And when we come to the Abrahamic story, the concept of how did God create man? God is this inconceivable source, and this inconceivable source imbues man with its breath, in some sense makes man from clay, imbues its breath into man, puts its breath into man, and then in some sense tells his creation to say the celestial names and whatnot. And then there's the whole falling from the Garden of Eden component to it. But this point that God is inconceivable, and something from the inconceivable is animating the inconceivable's creation. So it's like the inconceivable gave life to the conceivable in the inconceivable way. I take that as a metaphor that if I was to look at it from just a religious context, the soul is like an extension of God, or in certain contexts it's like the secret of God, but what it is that inconceivable factor in our intelligence. Now, there is also this idea that everything started from this inconceivable source and everything will return to this inconceivable source. What I'm saying, is it God's life, or the idea of is it man's life or God's life? For a moment I thought that who is this world made for? Human beings have a tendency to ethnocentrically or to centralize their meaning in accordance to where their attention starts, right? I guess I'll just directly say it. Pretty much I had this feeling and this view that, like, yo, what's going on here? If there's a non-physical intelligent component to reality, could it be that all the mysteries that appear to man's mind are not mysterious to that which is, let's say, of a greater value, of a more greater transcendental value? You know, it's kind of like all these enlightened sages, all these beings who went towards yoga, which the concept means to join the sort of union with the divine, or a divine union into a sort of singular absolute being. For a moment I asked myself, what is living in the moment? My body is temporary, the ideas come and go, you know, and I can't just claim the whole moment through just the idea of my name, you know. It's like realizing that your whole life you have been wearing the mask, a linguistic mask. It's as if a story is masquerading the mystery of our intelligence. Think of it this way, it's like I'm saying oh my god, it's like I'm saying, if we are not an object, if we are not a subject, but there's something that is alive in the moment. So I'm saying, if there's something alive that is neither I shouldn't say alive, but something that is intelligently present beyond an object and subject. It's kind of like, if we go beyond our egos, if we go beyond how an idea of ourself is containing the moment, we are left in being like, okay, is the whole universe happening right now, or is my individualism, you know, happening right now? pretty much, I'll try to polish my reasoning here. I'm saying if our intelligence is not is beyond an object and beyond a subject, and if the idea of an inconceivable of the inconceivable implies something that's not neither conceivable as a subject or object, it's kind of like in our ignorance, it's man's life; in our clarity, it's the life of the world happening, right? If the idea of the inconceivable means beyond subject object, if God is inconceivable, and if man experiences himself beyond an object and subject, it's like the only explanation is that some inconceivable force is living through all conception. Just like a person lives in a house, right? The person is not the house, right? So similarly, an inconceivable energy force, I don't know what to say, but let's say an inconceivable movement is living inside a conceivable movement. When I had this idea, it was as if like, what do I do now? That's what I thought to myself. It's like, who can I be if the objects change and the subjects change? And I realized that perhaps life is not just activity oriented. If I identify as an object, life is activity oriented. The major activity for physicality is survival. If I think about being a subject, identifying as a subject, a subjective activity, the main view for the subjective activity is actualization, activation. It's like our bodies are trying to seek balance and stability to kind of endure, and our minds are trying to be released. That's how I feel. I feel on some level from the beginning of my life, it's as if I've been observing a stage where a performance is waiting to happen. If somebody says Mr. Within, how would you geometrically explain metaphysics and physics? I would say it in a Cartesian way, where it's as if think of physics being a horizontal line and think of metaphysics being a vertical line, and the intersection of, let's say, a non-physical mind and a physical body is where consciousness is originating. But the realization that consciousness is not an object, is not a subject, because it is more than that. I sometimes think what moves nature silently. And it's very difficult, if somebody was to ask me, Mr. Within, are you religious? I would say, I would say it in this sense that if I believe in the idea of God, I am creating a partner to God. It's kind of like back in the day, people were worshiping objects, and wiser people came and said, yo, these objects can't be your gods, these idols can't be your gods. And it's like, what happened after idol worship? It jumped to ideal worship. So God was an object. When mankind could use the sophistication of language, then God turned into language. So if I choose to believe in the idea of God, it's like I am indirectly denying that the God is inconceivable. Do you know? So it's as if something beyond an object and subject, if I choose to believe it as a subject, then in some sense it's like, what sort of faith is that? You know, it's a sort of conditional relationship. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe in the God of direct experience, but God is not a concept. For me, I realized at some point truth can't be language, because language is technically memory, you know. So the challenge is, how can I accept truth if truth is not conditional? You know, so in some sense there is no self to believe. It's like, is a conceivable self capable of believing in the inconceivable when the belief has to be a conceivable idea? Now, even though I say this, how I would appreciate that the religious audiences kind of hear this is that I'm not saying religion is wrong. I'm saying that religious books and holy books are messages. They are not the truth. It's as if imagine somebody sends you a text message and says, "Hey man, meet me at this restaurant," and the person, instead of going to the restaurant, is in some sense just like looking at the text message, you know, worshiping the text message, not realizing that holy books are, in some sense, what revelation is a divine pointer. At least this is the view I have. Because you see in certain, especially Abrahamic contextualized, from an Abrahamic context in religious books, it's kind of like there's this view that anything bad that man does is from himself, and anything good that happens is from God, right? And it's this notion that in what sort of universe are we living in? I remember when I was young, right, we would play, it was me, my brother, and my cousins, and just kids from in our apartment building when I was young, and we would go in the street in Iran and we would put like 2 bricks or choose 2 corners, like 2 trees as sort of goalposts, and we would play soccer. And I remember there was this incident where somebody had scored this nice goal, and this religious person was walking by, and he just said mashallah, and what mashallah means, it's like God's will, right? So it's this strange situation where we are acknowledging an individualism to ourselves, but everything simultaneously is God's will, right? And of course there may be theologians who see blind spots to what I'm saying. Of course, I'm just one person out of 8 billion, just sharing my view. It's just the mystery of experience, and to what degree can we humanize it. And at the same time, it's this mystery of how can someone worship an inconceivable being? How? This is to me a very fascinating question. You know, Aristotle has this view where he says it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. It's a sort of suggestion that before man becomes ideology, he's observing it without being the ideology. You know, what I'm trying to say is that if somebody says, Mr. Within, do you believe in truth? The answer would be no. But if somebody says, Mr. Within, do you have faith in truth? Then the answer would be yes. So it's in some sense faith being an unconditional relationship with the inconceivable, but belief being a conditional relationship with the inconceivable, which is in some sense creating, it's like creating an equivalent to God, but as a concept. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I'd actually be fascinated if there's theologians listening to this. My big question is God a concept? And if the answer is yes, then how can it be God? You know? So to me, there seems to be a deeper truth to the moment, and it's rather than being a conditional truth, it's an unconditional truth. Now, if somebody says, Mr. Within, how do you discriminate between unconditional truth and conditional truth? Conditional truth has a condition, which means it has a boundary. So a conditional truth is a shaped truth, and unconditional truth is a shapeless truth. Language engages shape, you know, physicality, it's relevant to shape. So to me, the idea of God is very fascinating, and I'm even way more fascinated how billions of people on the planet are having a relationship with the inconceivable. To some degree, I feel they're having a relationship with their own mind, but for those who wonder about beyond the mind, the only option is left with faith, right? I'm not saying belief is wrong, because there is the observer effect in place where it's like a person's attitude is kind of creating the reality, or a person's view suggests the potential of their moment. It's like I'm not telling people to believe or disbelieve. I'm just saying if a person chooses to believe in the inconceivable, how is that possible? You know, are we turning God into a concept? Or is God a quality of the nature of reality? Or in some sense, an agency that is the administrator of subjects and objects? Imagine somebody is walking and a tree is falling, and the tree falls right behind them and misses them, and the person suddenly feels like, wow, you know, imagine the religious person feels, wow, God saved my life, you know, there was some sort of divinity in the moment that helped me out, you know. But if we were to wonder about not just God moving physical objects, but God moving subjects in the mind. I'm this person who's been giving these talks for 8 years, and it's not just I've sat here in a one-sided way just talking to the world. I have wondered how my mind is even moving for me to be able to speak. And if I was to be very honest, it's instantaneous. There's a sort of moment where it's like, even as I'm giving the talk now, there's a space where my body is in, and then there's a space where I notice the concepts as sort of inner films passing by and me vocalizing them. What I'm trying to say is that a direct experience of truth perhaps is not an ideological concept. I feel conception has nowhere else to go than towards the inconceivable. Right now, we human beings are inside a conditional domain of the world, and we're trying to achieve success in a conditional setting, right? So when it comes to our body, we're like, okay, find food, shelter, water, you know, adjust temperature and survive, right? So it's a conditional game. It's like a video game, right? But at the same time, when I think about the ideas of man, if I think about not just what my body is, but when I think about what the idea of me is, ideas are found in a context, and that context is a story. So the biggest point I'm trying to make is, what if God was never a story, but stories are pointing to it? What if there is something going on here that from the beginning of time, different people have tried to engage? You know, it's like, imagine You're walking in this hallway filled with doors, like Matrix Reloaded style, and you suddenly notice from one of the doors that is closed there is a cloth. Imagine there's like some sort of cloth from underneath the door. So it's as if noticing something suddenly odd about the moment, and then in a matter of speech, treating the clues of one's perception as strings that can be pulled, and when you pull those strings you're wondering about what is actually moving the moment. This is the mystery of the human experience, dear viewers. It is so easy, it is too easy to accept storylines. It is too easy to give a shape, to just accept the shape. It's too easy. It's too easy to turn the world into a story and never wonder about it again. For me, I thought about it. It's like, what's the point of God creating a world so big? What's the point of everything being God's creation? And then man doubting God's creation and then fighting over linguistic values. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like the person looks in history and realizes, man, these different religions have been fighting with one another. But then the person's like, wait a minute, isn't everything God's creation? Isn't even evil God's creation? Do you see what I'm saying? That means everything started from a source. In a certain philosophical context, they call this the necessary existent, right? It's the cosmological argument. It's another way of saying, like right now I'm looking at this laptop. If I say this laptop appeared out of nowhere, it doesn't make sense. There seems to be a designer behind the laptop. So when people looked at the cosmos, they're like, yo, did it just appear? Who drew its shape? And in some sense, it goes to a sort of necessary existent. Something had to push the first domino. Or there had to be a sort of first domino that in some sense was absolute. Like, imagine an inconceivable domino pushed all the conceivable dominoes. And of course, keep in mind, these are just one person's views, guys. I'm not claiming to be right or wrong. I'm just saying that how can we touch the inconceivable with our minds when it's intentionally inconceivable? So, if I was to take this to a more sort of a practical sense, what does it mean? I'm afraid to say that for me the mystery is still left open. And what that means is it's just, I've wondered, is it an individual conceivable entity that's moving, or is it an inconceivable force field that is moving the conceivable entity? I feel on some level that there is another life happening simultaneously as this one. One can say there's multiple lives happening, but if I was to explain it, it would be as if there's a visible physical life. There's a visible non-physical life, which is our mind. Like, I don't know if people have noticed this, but you can close your eyes, and without light entering your eyes, memories can appear, visualizations can appear. We do not just have two eyes, the biological eyes. We have the mind's sight, which is the actuality of the third eye. The third eye is not, I don't entertain the idea as if it's like the pineal gland. To me, it's how the moment has an invisible value. There's a sight, there's a way we can look at something, right? Now the question comes, okay, let's say whoever you are listening to me right now, you can try this out for yourself and write in the comments or the chat section, but just for a moment, close your eyes and think about who you are right now. Try to envision yourself, like close your eyes and try to see yourself in your mind. right? And you'll realize, let's say you see your sense of self. Like I'll give you an example. Right now I'm looking at this laptop, okay? I closed my eyes and I'm seeing the laptop still. Okay, my eyes are closed, but I'm still seeing the image of the laptop. Now I ask myself, now instead of an image of laptop, if it was the image of self, the question comes, what is looking at the self before the free will actualizes that self? There is something within all of us that is an unknown presence viewing, looking out of our eyes. We don't know how to compartmentalize it, because it's as if it's like a square trying to, understand a cube and realizing it can't do it only two-dimensionally. What the idea of God was a hope for mankind that there is something more than the world. There's something here where there's an intelligence to the cosmic activity. And what religions are doing, all religions, polytheistic, theistic, they are acknowledging there is an intelligence, there's something moving in the moment aside from man, but they are storifying it to some degree. Now, I'm not saying the stories are right or wrong. Sometimes I'm even fascinated how ancient ideas exist today. To me, that's a sort of miracle. There can even be this argument that if somebody, if the concept exists, then the truth behind the concept also exists, because why else would the concept exist? As if the idea of God is in some way God, right? But I'm this person who's saying it's more inconceivable than ideology, the truth of this world. If I say the world is a happy place, that's a sentence. And is the world just a happy place? Could one sentence be the world? And that to me is equivalent to idol worship. If I accept a sentence as truth, it's another way of saying, I have forgotten what was here before language. That's the power of divinity. It is prior to anything that can define it. So, right now as I'm speaking, whose life is it? Is right now this moment being the life of my physical body, physical visible body? Is it being the life of my objective? Am I living as an object right now? Is it the life of a subject, an invisible subject, an internally visible but externally invisible subject? And that statement from Sri Ramana Maharshi, where he's saying that how would I say it? I'll read it. He says, it springs within us somewhere right in the middle of our being. The I, in quotations, the sense of self, he means, has no location. Everything is the self. There's nothing but that. So the heart must be said to be the entire body of ourselves and of the entire universe. So it's this view that we are not parts of our moment of being. Truth is being the whole moment at once. And somebody would say, Mr.Within, is this a sort of the artificial solipsism over reality? And I would say it's the absence of claim. You see, man's intelligence is what definitions are set boundaries. They are acceptances, But to accept the inconceivable is impossible, I find, right? Because how can you, it's like, what are you accepting, right? So it's more like, I think there's a sort of Taoistic truth, and I think really what faith is it's similar to how Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says action through inaction, right? And what that means is it's not a conditional belief, rather it's an unconditional faith. So in some sense, whether it's an object living in the moment, whether it's a subject living in the moment, or it's the inconceivability of everything at once being, and everything to man's mind is inconceivable, of course. What I'm trying to say is that for the first time in my life, I've wondered, whose life is this? Is it a subject's life? Not possible. Is it an object's life? Not possible. The object and subject change, and all I am left with is the unknown. It's as if to believe in God is to faith in the unknown or the unseen. I find is greater than belief in a concept. You know, the concept is a part of the space. Truth is beyond the parts. It's the whole. So it's in some sense like I'm saying, could it be that we think we're 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, but that's the sort of, from man's perspective, the sort of, we're experiencing our individualism, but could it be that at the same time that we're all living an individual life, there is a collective life taking place? A collective being is living a life through all of our eyes, right? Through everything, through not all of our eyes, through all of the dimension, right? And if that is the case, man is left in a situation to wonder about the evolution of perception. And there was a sage with the name Rumi, Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi, this mystic poet. And Rumi says, he has this poetic passage, you know, a Sufi mystical passage. He says, I died as a mineral and I became a plant. I died as a plant and I rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. Why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? I shall die once more as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I shall pass on to that which no mind can conceive. And then I believe the last line of the poem is something in the sense of everything other than God doth perish. Something in those lines. And so it's as if we think we are here playing an individual video game, but that intelligence which is playing the individual, it's like we think it's the individual's life, but the individual's separation is based on the collective present position of the moment. So what I'm trying to say is that, was man created for man, or was man created for God's witnessing from the religious perspective? In other words, I'm saying, okay, let's entertain the idea of God. Is man's, like, it's as if to me sometimes I see parallels, metaphoric parallels to archetypes. And when I think about the idea of God, I remember in one lecture I was speaking about it more as if, okay, let's say a human inventor built an android. Okay, it built an android, and the android could, in some sense, try to build an android as close as possible to a human, right? Let's say an android with human programming, right? And imagine one day the android, suddenly becomes conscious, and if people are like, Mr.Within, what's an android? An android is a robot that looks like a human. It's pretty much like a humanized robot. So imagine this inventor has made an android, and the android becomes conscious, and the inventor is sitting outside of the room where the android is in. So imagine, you know, the inventor is not right there in front of the android, and it's like the inventor is watching the behavior of the android from a different room. Imagine there's like some surveillance camera or something. Okay, and an android has become conscious in a room, and the inventor is watching this. So it's as if the inventor is waiting to see to what level of consciousness, or at what sort of fundamental question on the nature of reality inspires this android to notice that there's an inventor here. Okay. Now let's say this android, goes on, and it wonders, why was I made? Why do I look like this? Why what's the point of being an android and all of this? And let's say the android suddenly has an opportunity to meet the inventor. And to me that's equivalent to prophets contacting the divine, the divine agency or God. Right, so the angels, right? So this android lives its life. It thinks it's the only one there. It thinks it's the creator of the meaning of its life, but then realizes, no, there's an inventor here. And then the android, imagine, speaks to the inventor and says, inventor, why was I made? Why did you create me? Right? And imagine the inventor says, I made you so I could see how great you are. And it's this, if I was to take this back to the context I was speaking about earlier, it's another way of saying the inconceivable created the conceivable to see how great, to see to what extent of awareness the conceivable can have, What does the creation notice about the creator in the moment where the creation is defining itself as the creator? That's what free will means. There's always been a distinction since ancient times between free will or divine will. Now, before the idea of divinity, it was nature's will. It's as if is the world happening or is man happening? Is a collective event taking place here, or is it an individual event? And what happens to the individual when it realizes it's a collective event? Now, when it comes to divine ecstasy and in the mystical context of the union with truth, a sort of divine union with truth, an incredible metaphor I remember saying in one of the talks was that imagine a raindrop is falling, and this raindrop falls from the clouds. It doesn't know why it's there. It doesn't know why it's falling. It doesn't understand the intensity of its mistake. If we were to see parallels to the idea of Adam and Eve. And so the raindrop falls vertically, confused. What is the purpose of my individualism? I'm just a raindrop and the world is so big. But imagine it's raining in the ocean, and from a vertical dimension, the individual mysteries suddenly contact the horizontal ocean, and the mysteries are resolved. What really is going on here is that even from the secular perspective, we have this view that everything is energy. Right, that's how human beings are looking at life. They're like, okay, there's some energy here, So we are the containers for energy right now. So energetically, the world is being one moment. But the changing shapes of this energy, They say energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can transform, it can change. So it's as if the more we look at life and we identify with the presence of the whole moment, the less an object or subject are removing the moment. Do you know? It's like looking at a bird, right? Trying to build a nest and wondering why, what sort of reason does this bird have to build? And of course it's for survival or whatever, but at the same time the reason is dependent on what there is in the environment. You see, it's not just the self that can claim truth, it's a self in a world that is wondering about truth. So the truth must in some sense extend not only to the self but to the world, to the whole world. It's like saying, could manifestation be rooted in a timeless singularity? The changing manifestation where time is being how matter changes in space, and we notice. I sometimes wonder, this is one of the most fascinating ideas I personally have come across, I've wondered about pretty much in these talks, is that could being an individual human being be a phase in nature? Not that in the future we become a sort of cyberspace collectivity, or we become immortal robots, where consciousness has somehow been transferred through till the end of time, but rather I'm thinking that what is nature doing with itself? And to me it's like nature is this artist that never stops drawing. It's like to wonder why there is a creation, we are taken to the idea of the creator. To wonder why there is a creator. If the creator is inconceivable and we're conceivable, we're left only trying to approach it with conceivability. It's this, what I'm trying to say about this, the whole sort of the mystical experience or the religious experience, is that one is beginning to realize that the idea of their self is not the mover of the moment. So it's in some sense the creation. I'll give you an example. Imagine an inventor, that same inventor who built an android. He wanted to create an android that could feel, right? But then the android wonders, why am I trying to feel things? I'm an android, I'm a robot, it doesn't make sense, right? But it's as if what I'm trying to say is like the purpose of, let's say, it's like a square may not understand how it's being a cube. Similarly, the story of ourself cannot fulfill the motive of the movement of the moment. I'm trying to say that from one angle, God is here for man to have a relationship with, but from another angle, why is God watching man? Why is the creator watching its creation? Why didn't the creator just move on to the next level? That means I always thought about this where I'm like, from the religious story, God created this perfect being where it asked all the angels to bow down to, and one angel didn't bow down, and it was a sort of quality control, just like products in a factory, like they check the quality of the product, right? It's like the inventor is trying to check its invention, right? And to see to some degree how capable it is, right? But at the same time, why didn't God just instantly make man perfect? Why did he? It's as if, to me, sometimes I feel the archetype of the rebel angel is God's doubt, because God is creating everything. So to me, it's like the concept of duality, or the concept of the fallen angel and whatnot. That is God's doubt, right? But God is not a creature that can doubt, right? So it's in some sense, to man's mind, something imperfect appears, but a perfect being cannot make imperfection, right? It's as if, imagine you're someone, let's say there's a person, and this person feels they have made mistakes, they have, sinned and all this stuff, right? But they still believe in God, and then suddenly it occurs to them, wait a minute, is God's creation imperfect, or is it perfect? If God is a perfect being, how can it create something imperfect, right? So it's as if, like, from the Abrahamic story, Adam and Eve and the descendants of Adam and Eve are on earth until they realize they never fell, right? It's kind of like realizing earth is in the heavens. And I feel perfection was there, imperfection was the secondary. The causal position from religious perspective is that perfection created something that behaved imperfectly and therefore required to be tested to see how perfect it could be. But the perfection is only God. You know, it's like the android is not as perfect as the inventor. Like, they imagine a human inventor and an android. So imagine God and God's creation, right? I don't know how to say it. It's on the borderline of the language threshold and very close to a sort of paradoxical analysis. But really, what it is that the conceivable, once it realizes the inconceivable intent behind its conception, is no longer limited to its conception. You know, it's very strange. Some people, I've heard some people, spiritually minded people, say, "Yo, man, life is a school. We're here to learn and graduate to greater dimensions." You know, and it's like this infinite school, right? But you know, like the infinite classrooms to this school. But there are some people who are like, "Wait a minute, what if it's not a school? What if it's like a party and we're all waiting for the host?" You know. You know, it's kind of like to be a creature in the world. You know, it's like somebody who suddenly appeared in a, you know, teleported into a house party, right? And, you know, and the host is nowhere to be seen, the owner of the house party. But, and people inside the house party are arguing, "Yo, does anybody own this house? Does this house have an owner?" You know, and whatnot, right? But the host is not there. And something different about the limitation of this metaphor is, in some sense, that the owner of reality is not owning reality from inside reality. It's this strange thing, a view where God is beyond the world, and it's as if the world is God's. The world is God's gaze. The world is God's view, how God is looking, right? So it's like the divine will is the sight of truth. Anyways, is man's life indirectly God's life? It's another way of saying, is a conceivable reality indirectly an inconceivable moment, right? And what is living in the moment? I have, so far as I treat myself as a researcher of the human species, you know, and there's 3 dimensions. We wonder about the past, present, future, right? But when I wonder about what is living in the moment, I have reached this point where if I am not an object and if I am not a subject, how can there be a condition to truth? It's kind of like we're in this world until we realize the world was not here. Or it's another way of saying, rather than man is living a lifetime, God is the living world. We are indirectly being a collective being's clarity. Or clarification. That's a better way of saying it. And so let us imagine that a human being, you know, let's say, you know, some next level thing happened and 8 billion human beings behaved so incredibly that they all went into heaven. And then the question comes, what next, right? And heaven is an infinity. Like, to me, this was very fascinating about the idea of heaven and hell, that they were both infinite loops. I don't know if people have noticed this, but heaven and hell is like the earliest approach of man's mind to the concept of infinity, right? That means before, it's like endless repetition was the closest idea to infinity before the ideal. People had that idea. Is it God's life? Is right now the purpose of all phenomena to enter an inconceivable awareness, and whose eyes are more important? It's as if when the concept of truth is there, right? It's like, what can man do? Like, what can truth do? Right? Truth is like an instantaneous being. It's like instantaneously, inconceivably, reality is being, how conception changes. And there is a loneliness, there is a sort of isolation that the sense of self finds itself. That means when we look at this world, it's beyond our understanding. Why? Because the capacity of our brains, it's like the cosmos is like infinite terabytes, right? And our brains are like, I don't know, like 500 gigabytes or something, right? What I'm trying to say is that the life doesn't seem to be like the world is not here to be understood, because it's in some strange way it's impossible. So if the purpose for the conceptual entity is not to conceptualize the world, then what is left? That means, what can we do when we realize the presence of the moment is beyond an object and subject? And this is where I realize this is the power of the unknown. When one cannot do anything, they wait. When one realizes an awareness to, let's say, a singularity, everything is being truth, duality, truth is divided between chaos and order. If a person looks at the truth of the void, truth is empty, everything is void, or truth is just infinity, right? And so it's like an infinite moment, right? So the person is kind of left being like, what is it that is aware of emptiness? What is it that is aware of everything at once? What is it that is aware of change, chaos, and order? And what is it that is aware that the change is endless? The sentence I'm saying is that God's life is like a realization that no way this whole time it hasn't been my life, because the sense of self is dependent on everything else. To be honest, it's like the whole moment, the whole world is experiencing itself again. To be a human being is to be a memory of an endless universe. And so is it God's life? Not the conceptual position of God, but I would say that there is, the unknown is magnificently unknown. I have faith in God, but if I believe in God, then what's the point of the faith? Belief usually follows this idea. Let's say there's like imagine there's like imagine somebody to person A, person B. Person A comes to person B and says, "Hey man, there's an elephant behind you." And person B doesn't want to look behind himself, and he's like, okay, I have an option of either believing or disbelieving what this person says. But really the mystical pointer was that when the person turns around, they begin to see the truth. So rather than sculpting truth, the direct experience is an unconditional presence. What is living through our eyes is not the subject or object, and the species has reached its greatest transcendental problem-solving moment. It's really remarkable. We thought we were human until we realized awareness is present, until we realize that the human being is a part of the moment. The presence, the direct experiential presence of truth surpasses the indirect ideological notion of it. And when I say direct experiential presence, it's another way of saying, how does a conceivable entity experience the inconceivable? There's only one way: you were inconceivable from the beginning. So the answer is instantaneous. That means, is it God's life instantaneously? Yes. Anyways, guys, it's getting cold. Thank you for listening. And again, when you listen to these talks or any talk, keep in mind again what Aristotle says: it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. But really, because we're in a changing world, if we think life is a photograph, but when it's happening as a film, then it's like the actor has deceived itself in accordance by thinking that the director is a image. And of course, this is my view so far. I don't know how my view will change, but on some level I've reached the unknown, and it's as if, what can you expect from an unknown moment? You know, the smile of truth beyond shape. Much blessings and namaste.